Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Griffin and I'm a filmmaker based out of Orange County, California. And today we're going to do a little comparison of the brand new Canon EOS C80 compared to Old Faithful, the Canon C70. Let's get right into it. So the format for this comparison, what I want to do is really focus on things that I think are like real world use cases, how I use the cameras, and not necessarily like spec sheet by spec sheet. There's a lot of great videos out there that already go over all the hyper details of every codec, frame rate, bit rate of everything. But to be honest, as a filmmaker, I think a lot of that doesn't matter all that much. To me, it's like figure out what couple codecs you're actually going to use, go use it in the real world. And that's exactly what I've done. So I'm going to start off with the Canon C70. So Canon C70, Old Faithful here. This camera I bought in, I think 2020 or 2021, whenever it came out. It's been like absolutely amazing. Canon's been awesome with all the firmware updates. You can now do internal RAW, you can do 4K 24, 4K 60, 4K 120. It's really like everything that I would have wanted, with the exception of a couple small details. I've mentioned this before, but probably my number one thing, as well as everybody else's number one thing, is there's no SDI port. Well, that brings us to the C80. So Canon's done their homework. Obviously they're listening to us, guys, which is super cool. Boom, right there, we got ourselves SDI port right on the top of the camera. I actually really like this port position because when you run a monitor on your top handle, you can make it so there's a really short, like 1 foot SDI cable to your monitor. And that's really cool. So you don't have to have a huge SDI coming all the way from the back of the camera. So the second thing that kind of annoyed me about the C70 is there's only one of these. If you use like a Manfrotto style plate, there's only one of these screw holes that you can really use because it's in the center of the camera. But it's got two more on the sides, but those are kind of useless because most people just use like a Manfrotto style plate. With the C80, I have to like remember, I'm so used to saying C70. With the C80, there's two that you can use that are like vertically aligned. So it prevents that like weird twisting that would happen anytime you use the camera on a tripod. So that, just those two features alone are already like, to me, huge upgrades. It sounds kind of silly, but just those two quality of life improvements make me really happy. So one of the other really cool improvements that's on the C80 is they upgraded the joystick in the back of the camera. So I don't know if you guys can see that, if it'll focus. Yeah, this little guy. So the joystick on this one, it's really responsive. It reminds me of actually like the 5D Mark III. It's like really easy to use. It does exactly what you want. Seems funny, but if you have a C70, you probably know what I'm talking about. I actually just don't really use it to navigate the menus because it's always like going diagonal up and down and sideways. And it's just not really doing the thing that I want it to do. So that's a nice little quality of life improvement as well. When it comes to codecs and resolutions, the two cameras are similar in a lot of ways, but there are some notable differences. So starting out with the C70. The C70 has 4K 24, 4K 60, and 4K 120. You can use all those modes in long GOP, and you can also use, I believe, 4K 24 and 4K 60 in all-eye. To be honest, what I found in my own testing, there's not a gigantic difference between the two. For almost everything I use, I'm just using long GOP because it's smaller file sizes. So that doesn't really bother me that it can only do 4K 120 in long GOP. All those modes will be in Super 35. So the sensor, what Super 35 means, it means it's like a cropped sensor, but Super 35 is essentially what the vast majority of cinema cameras have been for most of cinema. So it's not a big deal. And then with the speed booster, or focal reducer as Canon calls it, it sort of gives you a full frame look with a few other weird quirks, but you can click here, watch a video I made on the speed booster. Essentially, it turns your camera into a similar field of view as full frame. Now, that's all well and good. The one caveat being, you can only use this with EF lenses with that full frame look. There's no way to use RF lenses with it. Like this lens here, the 24-105 RF 2.8. So this guy here, you can probably tell it's pretty dirty, but this thing is used and abused on like every single shoot. I love this lens. It's internal zoom. It's 2.8 all the way through, and it's got a smooth iris. It's really an awesome lens for the type of work that I do. Gives you a lot of flexibility, and having that extra range all the way to 105 instead of just 70 makes it basically live on my camera all the time. So this would be an example of a lens that you wouldn't be able to use using the speed booster. Another downside of the Super 35 sensor with the C70 is when it comes to really interesting lenses like these ones, these iron glass lenses, these are full frame lenses and they're PL mount, meaning you have to use an adapter from RF to PL. But you can't use the RF to PL with the speed booster, with the Canon speed booster at least, which kind of brings us to where the C80 falls in line. So when it comes to the C80, as you can see, the sensor is a full frame sensor. Now that's going to behave really similar to like photography cameras. So that's another benefit of full frame sensors is like, I really like having a photography camera and a video camera separate. And when you get a set of lenses, say you get like, you know, the Holy Trinity or whatever they call it, like 16 to 35, 24 to 70, 7200, or kind of like the new version, maybe the 15 to 35, 24 to 105, 2.8, and 7200. Those lenses would behave really similar on a photography camera like the R3 as they would on a video camera like the C80. So to try to simplify things down as much as possible for the codecs and resolutions for the C80, you can essentially do exactly the same thing as the C70, with the only difference being it does it in full frame, and it has the option to do 6K in RAW at 24 frames a second and at 30 frames a second. You can also crop into the sensor and do it at 60 frames a second. That was one thing I didn't mention with the C70. It also has really nice internal RAW. The majority of the time I'd say I'm using long GOP for like my corporate stuff, and for my commercial stuff I'm using the RAW. So it's this exact same for the C80. I really like both of those two codecs. One is kind of like that everyday codec, so to speak, really small file sizes. You're shooting long form events, corporates. I mean, sometimes I'm shooting these things where it's like a guy speaking for like, you know, a couple hours or whatever. Just put it on long GOP, nice small file sizes, and just make proxies or use the internal proxies because it's a little bit harder to edit. When it comes to shooting the commercial work that I do, I really prefer using the RAW because it has really a lot of information in the data and it color grades really well. By the way, guys, if you like the looks on the screen you're seeing, these are some LUTs that I have. They are available for download below. So I wanted to release my video a day after the release because I actually love going on the forums. I love checking out Facebook. I love seeing what people are saying. One thing I kept seeing repeatedly is, guys, where's the DGO sensor? There's no DGO sensor in the camera. So I kind of went out my testing and I was like, I kind of want to like break it, so to speak, and like push the image, like go 2 stops overexposed, 4 stops overexposed, 6 stops overexposed, and see, can I really see the difference in the DGO sensor in the real world? Is there a difference? Because Canon claims 16 stops for both of these cameras. I'm not zeroed and done, so I'm not going to do like the scientific test, but what I am going to do is go find out for myself because these are 2 cameras that I am going to absolutely have in my arsenal. So I took both these cameras out. My wife was nice enough to stand in for me, and here's how I properly expose the image, and these are just with like the standard Canon LUTs. I think both of these look great. Really not a gigantic difference to my eye. The big difference I would notice though is if you punch into 250% here, you can see the C80 is quite a bit more detailed. And some people like that, some people don't like that. If you don't like it, you can always use diffusion filters, but with the C70, you can see it's much softer here. There's no way to really make that more detailed. You can add sharpening in post, but it's not the same thing. So my preference would be when I shoot through like corporate interviews or something and you want to do like a little digital punch in, I do like having that extra resolution because I like to capture in 4K, keeps the file sizes kind of smaller, and you can still punch into like 150% and you're like totally fine with the C80. With the C70, I never do that. With the C500 Mark II, I'll do the exact same thing. And by the way, guys, I'm just doing these tests like kind of quick and dirty. I'm just pulling the highlights and the shadows down a bit. There's much better ways to do this, much more detailed ways. It's not what we're doing today. So here's 2 stops overexposed, pulled back. I think both of these look totally fine. If you make a mistake and you overexpose by say 2 stops, in almost any circumstance, with either of these cameras, you're gonna be just fine. Now here's 4 stops overexposed. Honestly, if you're overexposing by 4 stops, like, dude, you messed up really bad. But surprisingly, both of these cameras actually look really good to my eyes. I think there's not really much of a difference that I can tell. Highlights look good, shadows look good. I mean, yeah, overall it's a solid image. And here's 6 stops overexposed. I would say neither of these images are usable at this point. So, you know, to me, like usability in the real world, I don't know. They look essentially from a like ability to overexpose and pull it back, I think they're just fine. So what I didn't have time to do before this test, because I wanted to get this video out soon, because I only have the camera for a short amount of time for now, but I am going to do an underexposure test as well as a high ISO test, which kind of leads me into one of my next points. So when it comes to the C70, I would say that personally, I like using the C70. 800 is the native ISO, 1600 is totally fine. There's basically no difference that you can tell visually most of the time. And 3200 I think is about what I would say is my personal limit. I don't like to shoot above 3200 and I try to avoid shooting at 3200. When it comes to the C80 with my testing, it has what's called triple base ISO. So that means that the native is 800, then it has another one at 3200, which is super cool. I love that one. And it has another one at 12,800. So this to me is actually one of the coolest features of this camera. So I was actually shooting for one of my retainer clients earlier today, as a matter of fact. That's why I'm shooting this video at like 10 at night. But I was shooting at 12,800 ISO, and here's some of the clips right now. If you told me these were shot at 800 ISO, I'd totally believe you. I think 12,800 on this camera is perfectly usable. I didn't go any higher than that because I didn't have the need to. So I was actually solo today. I didn't have someone with me, so I didn't have really time to set up lights and all that stuff. So this kind of opens a lot of doors that I think weren't possible with the C70. One last topic I want to cover was the topic of autofocus. With both of these cameras, I do use autofocus a lot of the time. So for example, this talking head thing I'm doing right now, I'm using autofocus. It's completely trustworthy in my own experience, and it does well in the vast majority of circumstances. So with the C70, I do find the only time I'll really find it struggling, I would say, is in two circumstances. The first circumstance would be is if your subject is like strongly backlit. Say there's like a really bright window or something and it's right behind your subject's head. I find the focus kind of drifts a little bit and has a harder time maintaining focus on the face. The second circumstance is with much darker skin tones in underexposed circumstances. So I do find that it has a harder time focusing then. So with the C80, I haven't tested it in all circumstances, but I did find overall the autofocus was just like really snappy and confident. I would say, like, coming from like the C70, it absolutely feels like a step up. I know there's like new technology. I don't know all the marketing names for it and stuff like that. Yeah, it grabs onto the subject. The tap to track does really well. The face autofocus, the eye autofocus. It also tracks the back of the head. And I just set the two cameras on a tripod as well and just did the exact same walking test. And you can see, here's the C70. It pretty much struggles like the majority of the time. And then here's the C80. And you can notice it's essentially what I would call perfect. So to me, there's absolutely a notable increase in the autofocus quality in the C80. So that brings us to kind of like the conclusion, the wrap-up thoughts. This is a bit of my opinion as someone who's been doing professional filmmaking for a number of years, and this is how I make 100% of my income. I own two C70s right now. I also own a C500, R5C, a red Komodo, and I don't know, a couple other cameras. What am I forgetting? R3. So yeah, I've got a lot of cameras and I'm pulling from a lot of that experience, and I've done a lot of the jobs in the sort of like, corporate filmmaking. I've done wedding filmmaking. I've done a lot of these things. So I'll share a bit of my experience and I hope it's valuable for you guys. If I were shooting weddings, I think the C80 makes a really strong candidate, mainly because of the high ISO capabilities. When you're shooting weddings, you're not always able to light every single scene. You know, if they're doing their vows or something like that, and you just got to jack the ISO up. C70 to me falls apart at about 3200. But there's people that shoot amazing weddings, like Matt from the Film Poets on C70s, and like absolutely like, it's not like it's mandatory. If you already are on the C70 or you have a couple of C70s, I don't necessarily think it's like a make or break upgrade. I would say if you're shooting commercials and you're doing pretty well, you're like profitable, like you're making a lot with each job or something like that, I'd say go for it, man. I really think the C80 is like an amazing upgrade because of the 6K. The limitation with the C70, especially like I do a lot of automotive filmmaking now, that's mostly what I'm involved in. By the way, I'm gonna bring you guys later this week on a job where we actually go hands-on with the C80 on an automotive job. So with the C80, just having the 6K, it allows you to crop and reframe a little bit if you didn't have perfect composure on a shot. It also allows you to stabilize and post a bit without losing so much resolution if you're still delivering in 4K like we do for all of our stuff. I'd say it's a no-brainer. If you're doing corporate work, this is where I think it's kind of interesting. So I was trying to think like which one I would go for corporate. I have a couple C70s on a lot of stuff. I'll just bring two C70s, throw them on tripods and like call it good. And it's totally fine. Clients never ever complain. The image looks good enough. Where I would say if you're like doing like more high-end corporate stuff or like maybe like a little bit of documentary stuff and you have like a producer or a director or an agent, like an agency person on set with you, like I do with my buddy Justin Fu all the time. He hires me, and one of the things he always likes when I do these interviews is he likes to have a big client monitor, always. So I hate running wireless because like no matter where you are, there's always like some problem and you spend like 10 minutes diagnosing the thing. I've got Teradek. The one that's much better is DJI, but having the SDI port, what I used to do with like the C200s back in the day was I had two 50-foot SDIs, I'd pipe them both into this big 19-inch monitor, run a quad split, and like that's your monitor. And he loved it. When I went to the C70, that was like one of the main things that was missing. So like, I would say if you're shooting corporate and you're like, you know, you're making it, but you're doing just fine, I'd say, man, rock with the C70. It's like, it honestly became a more valuable camera to me because it's like, it shows Canon's really investing in the cinema ecosystem. So I wouldn't feel the need to upgrade necessarily. But I would say if you are looking like, hey, look, I've got to get some tax write-offs this year or whatever, I would consider the C80 as a really strong contender. You know, I'd also look at the C400 and just ask yourself, I'll do a separate video on that. But yeah, also look at the C400 is what I'd say. So really the kind of message I want to drive home is like, if you have a C70 already and you're like, oh man, do I need to get this new one? If it fits your workflow, if it fits your budget, I would say go for it. It's like an absolutely outstanding camera. I am 1000% adding one to my arsenal. I don't know what camera I'm going to trade out or what the deal is going to be. We'll have to find out. But I talked to a few of my friends as well that are also really good filmmakers, and they had similar thoughts. Like, I feel like Canon, like they're like, okay, what is exactly, you know, not great about the C70? Let's fix every single thing and put it into a package that is at $5,500. I was on a call. So by the way, guys, Canon sent this out to me to try, not to keep, and basically just to test out and share my thoughts with you guys, because they know I've done a lot of videos on the C70. And when I was on the call with the guy, it was so funny. So he's like clicking through the slides, reading me the specs. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's crazy, sick. And then he gets to the last slide, he clicks to the price, and I was like, oh, I couldn't believe that it was at $5,500 when the C400 just came out at $8,000. And so it's like, they literally took a C400 and like, boom, smashed it in here, and like, there you go. It's a little smaller and it's way, way cheaper. So that's kind of leads me to the price on the C70. It's like $1,000 cheaper. I would say if you don't have either of these cameras, and maybe you're stepping up from say like an R6 Mark II or something like that, or maybe an R5 and you want to get your first cinema camera, man, I would say definitely go for the C80. This camera to me is like an absolute no-brainer. I would say with the C70, if you're really price sensitive, it's absolutely a really strong option. I think if you have it right now, man, get some use out of this thing. Like, it's such a great camera. Or what I would really suggest is maybe you have one C70 and you're looking to step up. Here's your big brother right here. This guy is going to be like a really nice A camera, and this would still complement it really well as a B camera. So I would say there's no wrong choice here. It's personal choice for you guys. And I think a lot of it depends on what lenses you have. Do you already have RF lenses? Do you use PL lenses, or do you only use EF? You know, what do you want? What I really want to know is what's your guys' circumstance? Like, what are you guys thinking on the camera? What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear them down below. Let's make a little discussion in the comments. So anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in to hear my thoughts. Really appreciate each and every one of you. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.